Where do legends come from, and how are they made? How do you go from a normal, everyday person to someone that is bigger than life? For Achilles, it was a dip in a river. For Conan, it was the thirst of greatness. For the Wright brothers, the promise of soaring like birds. It seems most legends, in fact or fiction, have humble beginnings, feel called to greatness, and give every ounce of themselves to get there. The rose-colored glasses of passing time also seem to help the legend receive his status, helping the ordinary grow into the extraordinary. So what does it take to become a living legend? If the story that follows is any sort of a template, it would be a whole lot of grit, ingenuity, and just a bit of luck. Our legends, designs, and inventions have redefined an entire industry. He holds hundreds of patents, and yet he started with the rest of them in the humblest of beginnings.
The summer between the 7th and 8th grade, we moved to a little town in West Virginia called Palestine, population 120. And that was really deep country. That's Appalachia. My parents bought a 213-acre farm, and we lived off the land. There was no clock. You worked from sunup to sundown. I started off every morning milking cows. We had about 100, 120 head of cattle. So it was just go, 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 go. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when you're a poor dirt farmer and the clouds are rolling in and you got 20 acres of hay to put in before the rain clouds come in and your sickle bar's broken, you figure out a way. And that happened a lot. A lot of the neighbor kids had dirt bikes, and I wanted to kind of hang out with them. I wanted to ride dirt bike too. So I would buy a Yamaha and then maybe a Honda Elsinore or a Suzuki or what have you. And because there was something that was broken on one, it wouldn't be broken on the other. I was the neighbor kid that would ride Yamazukis around or Kawahandas or what have you, because I would just slap them together any way I could to have something to ride. It was kind of fun. Kind of taught me that sometimes you just got to think outside the lines a little bit. From my earliest memories, I had a fascination with my dad's pocket knife. I was into it. When I was 5 years old, my dad got me my own first pocket knife. It was an old salesman sample Barlow. He rounded the tip off it, took the edge off it. As soon as I got it, I was on the sidewalk putting the tip back on it and resharpening it.
So what does a dirt poor but happy budding legend do to start his journey? Intentionally or unintentionally, he follows in the footsteps of many legends before him. He joins an elite group of fighters to learn, to travel, and to grow.
I graduated 2 days later. I was on a plane to Parris Island, South Carolina, boot camp, temperature of 104. So I got a plane ticket from Uncle Sam, which meant I was going from one airline to the next airline to the next airline just to be able to get to Savannah, Georgia. And I had never flown before. And I was a country kid that really hadn't gone out very far away from home. I got accosted by a bunch of Hare Krishnas while I was in there, which was kind of interesting because I'd never seen anything like that. And they were telling me that there were starving kids everywhere and trying to sell me some pencil sketches and some paintings and putting red paper flowers in my ear. And I was just worried about those kids. So I'd given them every dime I had. I couldn't even eat while I was trying to get to boot camp because the kids needed it more than me. But I was lost. I mean, I had never been anywheres. So it was interesting. And then finally, when I got to Savannah, Georgia, I went over and I said, "Hi, my name is Ken Onion. I'm supposed to check in here." And I just started getting screamed at and yelled at. I had to stick my nose against the wall. And I was already kind of in trauma. I had no idea what to expect for boot camp. So when I was in the Marine Corps, we kept having to work on these F-4 Phantom brake systems. The pilots had come in hot and we had to rebuild these brake systems. And so we'd take these brakes apart and we'd see this continuous problem as they used nylock nuts in a high heat environment. And when the brakes got hot, they'd melt that nylock out of the nut. So one day I called over the NCOIC, my boss, and I was like, doesn't the Marine Corps realize how stupid this is to put a nylock on a brake system? It'd be so much smarter if they just used a castle nut and a cotter pin. And he's like, well, that's a good idea. And he went and submitted that to the Marine Corps. He got this nice little bonus and he bought everybody pizza and beer. And I got the honor of putting all these castle nuts and cotter pins on them. It's probably a great thing for me though, learning experience, right? Don't share your ideas with too many people. Even people you respect and trust oftentimes will compromise their integrity for $1. Well, when you get out of boot camp, or just your last few days of boot camp, they give you what they call a dream sheet. They're already kind of telling you what your MOS is. I was an air winger, and so okay, you got North Carolina, Cherry Point, you've got this place, this place. Well, I put in for Cherry Point, North Carolina. I've never been anywhere else. So they sent me as far west as they could get me. which turned out to be a blessing.
So how far west could the Marine Corps send our future legend? It ended up being 4,651 miles away from home in the middle of an ocean. Ken Onion found himself living and serving in Oahu, Hawaii, a veritable paradise and completely new land for a young man from the deep south. But with all this beauty and newness, Ken Onion the legend was almost lost to Ken Onion the Playboy.
So it's kind of neat because here I am in Hawaii and now I'm learning how city folk dress. I'm learning a different culture. So Friday night was an E-Club thing, right? And my roommate, Billy Carter, he was a snappy dresser and he and I would go to the E-Club. Well, I couldn't get a girl to dance with me. Of course, I didn't know how to dance anyways, never danced a day in my life. And he told me that my bib overalls and my high-dollar Browning green boots and my fishing hat with a couple lures in it wasn't really bringing the ladies in. He told me to save up 2 of my paychecks. And then we went on to town and he hooked me up with some clothes that actually looked like I belonged in a nightclub.
So I got that going.
It was funny because I actually had girls ask me to dance for the first time after that. And then it kind of went to my head, which is strange. So I went to a modeling school. I started modeling for different companies. A lot of people don't even know this, but I actually was a stripper for a period of time. I was a model with Willie Smith from Willie Wear. So I was a sketch model for McInerney's, I was a model for Liberty House, and I was a private model for Willie Smith, Willie Wear. And he would come to Hawaii every once in a while, so he'd do his thing, right? He'd show his spring collection or his summer collection, his whatevers, right? I danced a little bit with a group of guys called the Pacific Playboys, which is funny, I know. But they taught me a few moves, practiced with them a couple times, and then I did my debut thing at Gabriel's nightclub in Waikiki. That's how I became a stripper. Inside I still felt like a redneck, but outside I didn't look like a redneck. And at one point I dated this girl and she said something to the extent that I'd probably like the old Ken Onion a lot better. And that hit me in a way that I don't think anybody had ever hit me before. And I went back and I did a lot of pondering, a lot of thinking, and I felt like a fraud. So I stopped all that stuff and I just embraced who the hell I was. I got out of the Marine Corps. Well, I decided to stay Hawaii because I met my wife, Noelle. I always had 2-3 jobs and a side hustle for the longest time. Mid-Pacific Airlines was in Hawaii at that time, and they had had a crash where one of their airplanes got crashed. It was no good. And so they yanked the engines out of it and they were gonna be charged some large sum of money to pull this thing out in the ocean and use it like some sort of a reef for fish and what have you. And so I went into the president of the company that had crashed and filed bankruptcy. I was like, what you doing with that old plane? She said, well, we're gonna pay someone to put out in the ocean. I'm like, sign it over to me, I'll take it off your hands. He's like, all right, your responsibility, signed it over to me as mine. I spent probably the next 2 months, I bought one of those chainsaw things with a circular abrasive saw blade on it, an OO bar, and I borrowed a 10-ton forklift from a friend, and I cut that entire passenger aircraft up in little tiny pieces, threw it on the bed of my pickup truck and sold it for scrap all around the islands. That's how I made the first down payment for my house. I made 35 grand off of that plane in scrap aluminum. Redneck Hustle is kind of cool times. I thought I was under this big trick that nobody knew about. I was just the only one stupid enough to put that kind of work into it.
Redneck Hustle had carried Ken all the way from a dirt poor kid in West Virginia to a man building a good life for himself in a far-off land. With military service under his belt, a beautiful woman at his side, and a sharp mind and strong back, our legend was shaping up to be a great husband, father, and friend. These are all great things to aspire to, but at the end of the day, not the things of history books. Just like the phoenix, Ken Onion the legend had to be put to the fire to be born. A fire that has affected him ever since.
Put my resume in at the refinery over here in Campbell Industrial Park, and they hired me right away. I was a machinist mechanic inspector over there. It was an adrenaline job. It was the hardest job I ever did. And on the side, I was started to make knives. I met this guy, Stan Fujisaka, lived in Kaneohe, and he was making knives. I could clear a room talking about knives back in the day. It didn't feel like anybody had my affliction. I'd always had a knife, always loved knives, collected knives as a little kid. And so I set up on my in-laws' carport, picnic table, a little janky-ass drill press like that, a little 6-inch with a 4-inch belt sander from Sears Craftsman. And when I finally met Stan Fujisaka, he told me I need to get a Burr King. I was like, where do I get a Burr King? He showed me, and I'd saved up enough money to get a Burr King. So I was making knives on the side, working at the refinery. I come home from the refinery, make knives. I got injured in that refinery. I had an asphalt pump dropped in my chest, plastered me on a steel drainage grate right on my tailbone, split my pelvis, herniated a bunch of discs in my back. It was a lot of pain. Big injury. I worked for as long as I could on that, but the pain got so intense I couldn't. Think I've had like 13 back surgeries. Supposed to have been in a wheelchair a long time ago. The refinery don't want me back. What they gonna do with a broke back machinist mechanic inspector? I was making knives as a hobby, wasn't taking it seriously. I was doing it for me. I have a couple of youngsters in the house. My kids were little at that time. Making workman's comp money wasn't even enough to pay my mortgage. I'm trying everything I can to make supplemental income to pay the bills. And we got behind a couple times. And them little kids is looking at me, they're just innocent little faces. They're totally, completely dependent on me. I never wanted my wife to just have to take care of a broke back son of a bitch the rest of her life too, So I want to be able to provide for the family like I guess every dude wants to. It wasn't the first time in my life my back been against the wall. My knife making skills were brand new. I was just learning from Stan. I had only made a few folders up to that point. I'm in the shop with that shop apron there and boxer shorts and a walker making knives. I was playing with one of Stan's knives in his shop one day, and Stan looked at me in the eye and says, if you ain't better than me, I feel like I failed you. And I thought about that, and like he gave me permission. Fast forward like a couple of months, and this girl come over to my house, her name was Strider. And she's like, Ken, I don't know if you can help me. She says, I bought the wrong cam for my Harley. I just need to knock a few thou off of this thing. She said cam, and everything just rushed in. And I had a Eureka moment like you wouldn't believe. So I ran over on my bench and totally ignored her. And I sat down with an old manila folder and I started drawing this thing out. Drawing out. I could use the blade as a cam. I could just put a spring, toggle that thing around. I finally got to her project, milled off her cam a little bit. Everything fit good, sent her on her way. It was all well. Spent the next 36 hours, built 2 prototypes of this knife, this assisted knife. Problem was, I didn't have the right wire. So instead of having a nice little bump and assist, like I was thinking to make it smoother than Stan's, these things were punchy as hell. And so I jumped in my truck and I went over to Stan's house. I'm like, Stan, I got something to show you. We pinky promised and all that kind of stuff. He wouldn't tell anybody. I wanted to get his opinion. And I showed it to him. He's like, oh man, Ken, I think you're really onto something. He says, that's not a switchblade knife. I'm like, no, Stan, I looked up the law. A switchblade knife, you got to apply manual pressure to a button spring or other mechanism contained in a handle. That's what they say. Well, I'm not applying anything. I'm applying manual pressure to a thumb stud or opening lug, which is the exact definition of a one-handed knife. Think you're onto something, Ken. You ought to get that patented. I don't know how to get anything patented. I'm real quiet about this thing, real hush-hush. Turns out I get this patent attorney. He's a property rights specialist for NASA. Cost me a fortune. And I'm about to give up. I had spent $14,600 on a patent while I'm on workman's comp, not even hardly able to make my mortgage payment, thinking I'm going to live under a bridge and have to sell my home. I'm trying to get this thing out there. I have people sign non-disclosure agreements. Ain't no way that I'm going to get this thing sold. Everybody thinks it's a switchblade knife, even no matter whether I show them or not, that it doesn't meet the definition contained in the criminal code. And last minute, Doug Flagg from Kershaw comes to Hawaii to do the Uzuo Brothers show and use that as an excuse to hunt me down and try to get me to design for Kershaw. The funny thing is he had no authority to do that. He was a national sales guy. He just knew Kershaw was going bankrupt and they were going to close the doors real soon. And he needed to do something. I told them what I wanted and they were like, okay. It was craziness. Kershaw could not make these knives fast enough. And nobody in the industry had anything like that, semi-automatic. Everybody wanted switchblade, but almost all the states were anti-switchblade. And it was just a toy factor that everybody wanted, right? They wanted the fidget factor. SpeedSafe had the fidget factor. I mean, my goodness, the flip, everybody wanted that, right? It worked out great. So it was kind of fun because this dumbass old redneck from Hawaii is a skid mark in the history of those Washington, D.C. tight asses is trying to make switchblade knives illegal. I got around all their language. I'm just a dumb old redneck.
On the brink of collapse, ready to throw in the towel, the legend, Ken Onion, really did rise from the ashes of injury and uncertainty. With his growing success, Ken has never forgotten where he came from. And that very early experience of charity with the Hare Krishnas has permeated his work inside and outside the world of knives, including a lot of work directed at veterans that just so happened to open another door that allowed Ken to use his unique talents.
I met a guy, Doug Warren, who worked with Paralyzed Veterans of America, and I wanted to get involved. And he talked about this bear hunt that they did in Alaska. And so I volunteered to go up there and help with this bear hunt in Alaska. I actually sponsored it. I have to sharpen everybody's knife. once they get done skinning their bear, or multiple bears, 4 or 5 bears a night. And so I got my stones out and I'm sharpening everybody's everything. And somebody had brought this Tonka Truck looking electric sharpening device and put it on the shelf in the dining room area. And while everybody was out partying, I'm sharpening everybody's knife. And I'm looking at that thing and I'm like, I'm Ken Onion. I cannot sharpen a knife with a Tonka Truck. I'm using my diamond stones and I'm just spending all my buddies all partying, having a good time and celebrating. Well, I was missing out on all that. I'm like looking at this Tonka Truck thing hanging up on the shelf there. And then finally, when nobody was looking, I'm like, well, that thing's electric. Maybe this thing will help get me halfway there. So I pull it out and I unbox it and I'm like, bzz, bzz, bzz. I don't know, man. Bzz, bzz, bzz. So when nobody's looking, I start grabbing my knives. And, not bad. Not bad. And then I'd touch them up on the stone and be like, there's your knife. But anyways, I was impressed with this little Tonka Truck sharpener. And I was such a snob to it. I had this preconceived notion of how bad it was. You know, I would go on the blade forums, I'd go on USN, I'd go on the different knife discussion boards to just see what people are talking about. So I see this Work Sharp thread. I'm like, hey, all right, let me check this thing out. Everybody is just disrespecting this thing and snobbish attitudes like I had. And I knew that all these people that had these preconceived notions about this sharpening system had never used it. They were looking at the Tonka Truck box and they just had this opinion, unfounded opinion. And so I chimed in there and I'm like, listen, I know that you guys are all judging this thing based on appearance, and I did that too. And I told them my experience and how impressed I was with this thing. And I told them there were a couple of things that I would change about it, but overall it was a really good idea. It changed the whole thread around, and then people went from being 99% negative about it to being more positive and open to learning more about it. And then somebody from Work Sharp texted in on there and said, wow, having Ken Onion endorse our product is like having Babe Ruth endorse baseball or something to that. And I was like, whoa, that's a big compliment. Well, anyways, it was like, thank you. I followed the thread a little bit longer, but I didn't think it was going to go any further than that. I don't know, it was a week, a month, 2 months after that, I got a call from them saying, hey, I want to come over and talk about possibly doing a sharpener, which is really cool because the whole time I was at Kershaw, I was trying to get them to build a sharpener, like a really cool sharpener, an electric sharpener. And I had all kinds of engineering drawings, but the motorized construct of it all scared the knife companies. They didn't want to get involved in the motor thing. It's unfamiliar territory because it just seemed odd to me that you got all these knife companies out there that are selling a product that continuously needs to be sharpened, but none of them sold an adequate sharpener to maintain their own knives. When Work Sharp guys contacted me, I'm like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever because this is what I really wanted to do in the first place. So I dove deep in with Work Sharp and we came out with the first Ken Onion version. And it stood the test of time, and I'm really proud of that. Times have changed a little bit, but I still stand by that old sharpener, and it's proven well, and it's worked great, and it's the industry standard, and it's what all sharpeners are judged off of at this point. And I am so grateful for Work Sharp to give me the opportunity to do something that I've wanted to do for 15, 20 years at that point. And it's been an incredible relationship since, and I'm just grateful that they continue to involve me in the process. And the beautiful thing about Work Sharp is that everybody views things through a different lens. And collectively, the pieces of the puzzle fit together so beautifully that they can't help but just come out with really great things. Dan works off a completely different part of his brain than I do. And it's a fascinating lens to look through. I learn a lot from him, and in just the way that he processes information is fascinating. From the very beginning, Kyle's been my go-to, my contact guy. When we communicate, he's just the kindest person. It's like, hey, I miss you, man. How you been? Let's catch up. He's just the gentle, kind, very precise, very organized individual. The reality is, Work Sharp don't need me. Work Sharp brilliant, but don't tell them that. I'm just happy to be a part of the team. I'm just along for the ride. It's all just this really good team. It's this really intricate puzzle where everything fits so beautifully and everybody's doing the right thing for the right reasons. You know, the whole Derek's team is some of the kindest, most gentle people I've ever met in my life, and very loving. And I don't know how many people get to find out what they're truly meant to do in their lifetimes and then actually get to do that. So I consider myself very lucky to know what I was meant to do and to be able to do it. I really like what I do. I enjoy this. This is fun to me. I don't really have to work for a living. I get to do what I love to do for a living. And luckily there's people out there that like what I do, and I'm grateful as I can possibly be to those people. Dream a dream. I get to dream a new dream every day. That's pretty cool, right? I want everybody to know how grateful I am that my stuff is so well received. I want Worksharp to know how grateful I am for the opportunities that they've given me and the listening ear and figuring things out together. I really feel like a member of the team. For the customer base that still appreciates my stuff after all these years, the consumers that are always wondering what Ken Onion's doing next, for the knife reviewers out there that say nice things about what I'm doing or set me in my place when I'm doing something wrong. I could never express my gratitude enough. And that sounds like a fucking Hallmark card, but it's real.
Yeah, that Ken Onion smolder.
The smolder.
The smolder.
Why?
You want to get inside?
Is this crazy or what?